The coffee cup hit the floor before anyone in that shop understood what had just happened. It shattered ceramic white against dark hardwood, and the sound of it cut through every conversation in the room like a crack of a bat in an empty stadium. A little girl in butterfly rain boots sat flat on the ground, both small palms pressed to the floor, trying to make sense of why the world had suddenly shifted beneath her. Her hot chocolate was spreading in a slow, dark wave toward the baseboard heater. She wasn't crying yet. She was too stunned to cry. The woman standing over her didn't look down. She looked at her shoes. "Are you serious right now?" The voice was low and airless, the kind of tone that could freeze a boardroom mid-sentence. "Do you know what these cost?" The little girl looked up. Her name was Lily Whitfield. She was 6 years old. She had been crouching by the condiment station, picking up a dropped napkin for a complete stranger, because that was the kind of child she was. And the man sitting alone in the corner booth, the one in the faded flannel shirt, the one nobody had looked at twice since he'd walked in, was already on his feet. Not fast, not loud, just moving, the way water moves when something disturbs its surface. Deliberate, inevitable. There was a scar along his left jaw. Pale, clean, running from just beneath his ear to the edge of his chin. It was the kind of mark that told a story to the people who knew how to read it. Nobody in that coffee shop knew how to read it. Nobody except the man who was about to walk through the front door with his hand drifting toward his jacket. That scar wasn't from a car accident. And the man wearing it had spent 11 years making absolutely sure that people like her never found out what it really meant. But 3 hours earlier, none of them knew any of this was coming. Before we go back to the beginning, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe that the quietest person in a room is almost always the strongest one in it, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is about to prove exactly that. Stay with me, we're going back to where this morning started. The alarm went off at 6:15, same as every morning. Daniel Whitfield had been awake since 5:42. He always was. Old habit. The kind that doesn't loosen itself just because the war is over, the kind that gets wired into a person after 11 years of running operations in places that never made it onto the evening news, in countries whose names he was still not permitted to say out loud in certain company. The difference between 6:15 and 5:42 had, on more than one occasion, been the difference between Daniel coming home and Daniel not coming home at all. He lay still for a moment and listened to the house. Asheville, North Carolina had a particular kind of quiet on Saturday mornings that he had learned to appreciate the way a man appreciates something only after losing everything he thought he wanted. The Blue Ridge outside his bedroom window was pulling fog up from the valleys in long, slow ribbons, the whole mountain looking like it was exhaling after a long week. He had chosen this city deliberately, 8 months after Emily died, because it was far enough from San Diego that he could stop running into people who remembered who he used to be. He got up and started the coffee. By the time Lily came padding down the stairs, mismatched socks, one yellow with ducks, one green with stars, an intentional fashion choice she had explained to him at length on a previous Tuesday, he had measured out the pancake mix, cracked 2 eggs, and laid the bacon in the cold skillet the way Emily had taught him. Always start them cold. Never rush the fat, Daddy. Lily stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, and the very specific expression of a 6-year-old who has been planning a negotiation since the moment she opened her eyes. "I have a proposal." Daniel did not look up from the skillet. "I'm listening. If I eat all my eggs, all of them, not most of them, all, can I have the chocolate chip pancakes and the plain ones?" "That's not how negotiating works, Bug." "It's working, though." He looked at her then. She had Emily's eyes, not the color, which was his own flat slate gray, but the shape of them, and more importantly the expression inside them. A patient certainty that she was right, and was simply giving the other person time to arrive at the same conclusion. He had loved that expression on Emily for 9 years. He was not prepared, still, for how hard it hit him on a 6-year-old. "1 chocolate chip, 1 plain," he said. Final offer. Lily considered this with the gravity of a judge reviewing testimony. "Deal, but extra syrup." "That wasn't in the proposal. I'm amending it." He let her have the extra syrup. He set her plate down and turned back to pour a second mug of coffee, automatic, the motion completely unconscious. Muscle memory from 9 years of marriage, and had the carafe halfway tipped before his hand stopped. He stood there a moment, holding the carafe over a mug that nobody was going to drink from. Then he set it back on the burner. Rinsed the mug. Put it away in the cabinet. Some mornings, Grief doesn't announce itself. It just shows up as a second mug nobody's going to drink from. He stood at the counter with his own coffee and watched Lily arrange her pancakes in a specific order he had long since stopped questioning, and thought about what the morning held. Pick up Lily's Halloween costume from the dry cleaner on Lexington. She'd gotten purple marker on the cape, which had launched a full philosophical conversation about art and consequences that Daniel had handled imperfectly. Then the coffee shop on Marymount Avenue, the one Lily had decided was her absolute favorite, because the barista there, a young woman named Kezia, always drew a little star on the side of her cup. A regular morning. A regular Saturday. He had built his entire life in Asheville around regular mornings. He guarded them the way he used to guard things that actually needed guarding. He just didn't know, yet, what was already moving toward him. 2,000 miles away, in a glass tower in Chicago's River North neighborhood, Rebecca Sinclair was on her 4th cup of coffee and hadn't slept more than 3 hours. The whiteboard behind her desk had been covered and erased and recovered so many times in the past 72 hours that the surface had started to bleed old timelines, ghosting through the new ones, like arguments that wouldn't stay settled. Someone, at some point, had drawn the DoD contract milestones in red marker across the full width of the board. Rebecca herself, at 2 in the morning on Thursday, had drawn a large X through all of it. The Department of Defense subcontract was worth $412 million across 7 years. It was the largest deal in the 20-year history of Sinclair Aerologics. It was also, as of 6 days ago, 6 days away from unraveling before it was ever formally signed. Her lead engineer Marcus Dell, 9 years with the company, architect of the proprietary routing system the entire contract was built around. A man she had promoted twice and trusted, apparently, past the point of wisdom, had resigned on a Monday morning via a 3-sentence email. He had taken with him documentation that belonged to her company. Her general counsel had been working the phones for 5 days trying to construct a legal mechanism that could hold, and Rebecca already knew the gaps that were going to swallow it. Her largest investor, a private equity firm out of Dallas called Sternwood Capital, had requested an informal check-in for later in the week. Rebecca had been in enough rooms to know that when Sternwood Capital called something informal, the formal decision had already been made. And that morning, her assistant had sent the wrong gate number to her phone at O'Hare, gate B14 instead of B41. Rebecca had discovered the error at B14, sprinted through 2 terminals, arrived at the correct gate 40 seconds after the jetway door had closed, and was now standing in a Hertz rental car line at Asheville Regional Airport calculating, with the cold precision of someone who had learned to calculate everything, exactly how much time stood between her and a meeting she absolutely could not miss. 31 minutes if I-26 was clear. It was not clear. She found parking a block and a half from the building, stood on the sidewalk, and made herself take exactly 8 seconds to breathe, a technique from a therapist she had seen 4 times in her early 30s before deciding she didn't have time for self-knowledge. 8 seconds. That was the deal she'd made with herself. She needed coffee. The shop on the corner would have to do. She walked in without looking at the menu. She stood at the counter without looking at the barista. Large black coffee. Whatever's already brewed. The barista, a young woman with natural hair pulled back and a small gold stud in her nose, said, "Of course, it'll just be 1 second. We just started a fresh pot." "I have 11 minutes," Rebecca said, already reading her phone. "Figure out how to make that work for both of us." The barista turned away without responding. The man in line behind Rebecca caught the barista's eye across the counter. He gave her a small, quiet nod, the kind that says, "I see you. Don't take it personally." The barista gave him a thin, tired smile. Daniel ordered a medium coffee and a hot chocolate with exactly 2 marshmallows and went to find a booth with a clear sightline to the front door. He always did. He had never once, in 4 years of civilian life, made a conscious decision to sit with his back to the wall. It just happened the same way his eyes swept a room when he walked in, checking corners without moving his head. The same way he had already, without thinking about it, noted the 2 exits, the position of the only other man standing near the door, and the fact that the woman in the gray coat at the counter had the body language of someone who was 1 bad minute away from doing something she couldn't take back. To everyone else in that shop, he was just a tired dad in a flannel shirt. Lily was drawing on a paper napkin with a crayon she'd pulled from her coat pocket. She carried crayons the way other people carried lip balm, when the stranger at the next table knocked a napkin off the condiment. Station. It drifted to the floor. Lily saw it. She looked at the stranger. Then, without any announcement or fanfare, she slid off her seat to go pick it up. Daniel watched her do it and felt the specific, quiet weight of a father who is watching his child be exactly who he raised her to be. He didn't see Rebecca Sinclair moving until she was already too close. He was on his feet before his mind had fully processed why. Rebecca Sinclair had been moving through the coffee shop the way she moved through every space that wasn't hers forward. Phone up, the rest of the world arranged around her line of travel when her shin connected with something small and solid and completely unexpected. She heard a sound. Then a crash. Then silence, the particular silence of a room where something has gone wrong and nobody has decided yet what to do about it. She looked down. A little girl in butterfly rain boots was sitting on the floor. A cup was rolling toward the wall. Hot chocolate was spreading in a slow brown arc across the hardwood. The child was looking up at her with wide eyes and a lower lip that was already beginning to tremble. Rebecca processed these facts in rapid, automatic sequence. Her shin, her coat, the shoes, Italian leather, bought in a store on the Via Monte Napoleone 2 summers ago, at a price she had not flinched at because she had built her whole life around arriving at the point where she did not flinch at things like that. The stain was spreading toward the hem. "Are you serious right now?" Her voice came out before any part of her that might have caught it had the chance. Low, flat, involuntary. "Do you know what these cost?" The room went quiet. Lily looked up at the woman standing over her, and her expression did something that every person in that coffee shop would remember differently, but describe the same way: pure, unguarded, baffled hurt. The kind a child wears when an adult does something that doesn't fit into any category a child has been given yet. Daniel was beside his daughter in 4 steps. He lifted her in a single, clean motion, one arm under her. No hesitation, the way a man moves when the movement has been trained past the point of thought, and he set her against his side and turned to face Rebecca Sinclair. His voice, when he used it, was quiet enough that the people 2 tables away had to stop their own conversations to catch it. "She's 6. Lower your voice." Rebecca heard the calm, and it made her angrier. She was furious at everything that morning, at Marcus Dell, at Sternwood Capital, at her assistant, at the gate, at the traffic, at the entire sequence of failures that had deposited her in this specific coffee shop, in this specific moment, and the absolute, unhurried steadiness of the man in front of her landed in the middle of that fury like something designed to ignite it, whereas whoever's supposed to be watching her. Rebecca's voice stayed low, but the edge in it sharpened. "She's running around like an animal." Behind them, someone put a coffee cup down very carefully. Daniel's jaw moved once. "I'm her father," he said. Same quiet, same flat. "Apologize to her. Apologize." Rebecca said the word like she was holding it up to light to check for cracks. "Because your child ran into me." She was picking up a napkin someone dropped. "I don't have time for this." "I know," Daniel said. "You mentioned the 11 minutes. Something in Rebecca's face shifted just barely, just for a second, and then locked back down harder than it had been before. She had spent 20 years in rooms full of people who used patience as a power move, and she recognized it when she saw it. And what she was seeing right now activated every instinct she had for making the other person feel the consequence of challenging her. "I'll call CPS myself," she said, dropping her voice to something cold and very deliberate. "I'll tell them exactly what kind of man lets his kid run wild in public." The room went completely still. Lily had buried her face in her father's shoulder. She was crying, now quiet, small, pressed in against him, trying not to be heard. Daniel looked at Rebecca Sinclair for a long moment. When he spoke, the words came out soft enough that they almost didn't seem like words at all. "Don't talk about my daughter again." Not a threat, not loud. The way a wall is a wall, not because it wants to be, but because that's what it is. Rebecca stepped forward and kicked him. It wasn't a full swing. It was sharp and frustrated and humiliated, the physical punctuation of a woman who had just lost an argument she hadn't planned on having, delivered before the thinking part of her caught the doing part. But it landed, and in the silence of that room, the sound of it carried farther than she intended. Daniel Whitfield did not move. He did not step back. He did not retaliate. He stood with his daughter against his side, and he absorbed the impact the way a mountain absorbs weather. And then he looked at Rebecca Sinclair, and he said 2 words. "Are you finished?" No volume, no edge. The tone of a man who has already arrived somewhere the other person hasn't reached yet. A barista stopped mid-motion. A man at the counter lowered his phone to his lap. The woman by the window put down her reading glasses. The room had been waiting for Daniel to react. What it got instead was something none of them had a word for, a stillness so complete, so inhabited, so deliberate, that it felt like it had weight. Every eye in that coffee shop moved from Daniel to Rebecca Sinclair. And that was when the front door opened. The man who walked in was built for confrontation in a way that was immediately visible wide through the shoulders, eyes doing threat assessment before his second foot cleared the threshold, hand drifting without drama toward the inside of his jacket. He found Rebecca first. Then he found Daniel, and then he was moving across the room with the practiced speed of someone who had done this in far less forgiving places than a coffee shop in Asheville, North Carolina. "Sir." His voice carried the particular authority of a man who'd said similar things under considerably higher stakes. "Step away from her right now." Daniel turned toward him, unhurried. The bodyguard's name was Gabriel Ortiz. He was 39 years old, former Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance, had spent 8 years in service doing things in places that didn't make the official record before transitioning into 4 years of private protection work. He was good at his job. He was very hard to rattle. He covered half the distance between the door and Daniel Whitfield. Then, he stopped. Not slowed. Stopped full stop, mid-stride, like something had grabbed him by the chest from the inside. His right hand froze in place near his jacket. His face, which had been carrying the controlled expression of a professional doing a job, did something that no one in the room could quite name. The color dropped out of it in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. He was looking at the scar. The pale line along Daniel's jaw, running from just below his left ear to the edge of his chin, and then something else, something just visible above the collar of the flannel shirt, a mark that Ortiz had last seen in a classified photograph in a debrief room in 2018. Next to a name he had not said out loud since. Next to a name he had, honestly, stopped allowing himself to think about, because some things you survive by agreeing to let them be over. Gabriel Ortiz stood in the middle of a coffee shop in downtown Asheville with his mouth slightly open and no sound coming out of it, and for 3 full seconds he was not a bodyguard in a gray coat. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere loud and dark and close, and the man standing across from him was the reason he had made it out of that somewhere alive. "Gabriel." Rebecca's voice cut through, thin with impatience. "What are you doing?" Ortiz didn't answer her. He lowered his hand from his jacket. He let it fall to his side. Slowly, like he was setting something down. He straightened up. He took one breath, and then he turned away from Daniel Whitfield and turned toward Rebecca Sinclair, and his face had rearranged itself into something that was not anger, not fear, but the specific expression of a man who has just understood something he cannot walk back from. "Ma'am," he said. "Finally, you need to apologize to this man," Ortiz said. His voice was quiet, and it was completely, unmistakably serious. "Right now, and then we need to leave." Rebecca stared at him the way she stared at things that weren't behaving correctly. "Excuse me?" "That man," Ortiz said, and the words were measured and careful. The way words are measured and careful when the person saying them understands the full weight of what they mean, has done things for this country that I cannot say out loud in a public place. "And you just kicked him, in front of his daughter." He paused. "I'm asking you once. Apologize. Then we leave." Quietly. The room was completely silent. Rebecca's mouth opened. Her eyes moved between her bodyguard and the man in the flannel shirt. Something behind her eyes was calculating. She could feel her own mind running through the options, the levers, the angles, and landing, finally, on the one move she always had left. She still had the phone. She still had the number. One call. The right person on the other end. And this whole situation could be reframed in 60 seconds into something she controlled again. She pulled out her phone. She found the contact, a name she had cultivated carefully over 4 years of defense contracts and dinner tables in Washington, D.C. And she hit dial. And she stepped toward the center of the room, loud enough that everyone could hear, because if she was going to use this, she was going to use it where it landed on more than one person. Gabriel Ortiz watched her do it. He looked at Daniel Whitfield. Daniel Whitfield was watching Rebecca with the same expression he'd worn through everything: patient, flat, unreadable. He had one hand resting on Lily's back, where she was pressed against him, her small fingers curled into the flannel of his shirt. Ortiz looked at that hand. at the child holding onto it. He looked away. The call connected. Rebecca. The voice on the other end was the kind of voice that comes from decades in rooms where every single word is on record, measured, controlled, giving nothing away in either direction. "I need 60 seconds. Rebecca said, stepping further into the center of the room. "I'm in Asheville. There's a man here who's been harassing a client of mine, and I need him to understand who he's dealing with." "Wait." The voice cut in. "What city?" "Asheville, North Carolina. Describe him." Rebecca looked at Daniel. "Medium height, dark hair, flannel shirt, early 40s. He's got a scar on his left jaw. He was apparently in the military at some point." The line went quiet. Not the quiet of poor reception, the quiet of a person on the other end making a very fast calculation about something that Rebecca could not yet see. "Rebecca," the voice said, and when it returned, it was carrying something different, something she had never heard in it before. In 4 years of dinners and contracts and careful relationship building. "I need you to stop talking." She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Stop talking." A pause. "And put him on the phone." The room seemed to tip slightly on its axis. "Put him," Rebecca's voice faltered. "I don't understand what—" "Rebecca." The voice was very calm and very clear. "Put that man on the phone, right now." Every person in that coffee shop was watching her. Rebecca Sinclair stood in the middle of the room with her phone in her hand, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she had absolutely no idea what her next move was. She turned toward Daniel Whitfield. He was already looking at her, and what she saw in his face in that moment, that same patient, unhurried stillness, that complete absence of surprise, told her something she was not ready to hear. That he had known, from the very beginning of this morning, exactly who he was. That he had never once needed her to know it. She held out the phone. The whole room held its breath. Daniel looked at the phone in Rebecca Sinclair's outstretched hand the way a man looks at something he has no particular need for but will accept out of courtesy. He passed Lily gently, with a quiet word in her ear, to Kezia, the barista, who had stepped out from behind the counter at some point during all of this, and was now standing nearby with her arms open like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lily went without protest, tucking her face against the young woman's shoulder and keeping her eyes on her father. Daniel crossed the space between himself and Rebecca in 3 unhurried steps, took the phone from her hand, and put it to his ear. "Yeah," he said. What the voice said to him took roughly 40 seconds. Daniel stood still through all of it, his free hand in his pocket, his eyes on a fixed point somewhere past Rebecca's left shoulder. His expression did not change once. When the voice finished, Daniel said 2 words, "I know," and handed the phone back. He went to collect his daughter. Rebecca stood in the center of the room with the phone against her ear, and the voice on the other end was still going, and what it was telling her was landing in sequence, each sentence dismantling something she had walked into this coffee shop believing was solid. The voice belonged to a man named Harlan Weeks, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. A man Rebecca had spent 4 years cultivating the way a chess player cultivates a position, patiently, precisely, always 3 moves ahead. A man she had believed, until approximately 90 seconds ago, was on her side. He was not on her side right now. He was telling her, in the measured cadence of a man who had delivered difficult information before, that the name attached to the face she had just described, the scar, the flannel shirt, the tired dad in the corner booth, was a name that carried weight in rooms she had never been permitted to enter. That the man she had dismissed as nobody was the kind of nobody that senior officials went quiet for. That what had happened in this coffee shop, which had already been recorded on at least 1 phone and possibly more, was not something that existed in a vacuum. The DoD subcontract, Harlan Weeks said, was going to be paused, pending a review. Not because of this morning specifically, but because word traveled, and accountability didn't require a headline to function. It required documentation, and documentation in this particular case existed. "You struck a man," Weeks said, and Rebecca could hear in his voice the thing he was not saying alongside the thing he was, "who has done more for this country than your boardroom will ever understand. That is not a misunderstanding I am able to fix for you." The line went quiet. Then it went dead. Rebecca Sinclair stood in a coffee shop on Merrimon Avenue in Asheville, North Carolina, holding a phone, playing silence, and felt the specific, nauseating sensation of a floor she had believed was permanent beginning to give. She had built 20 years on the premise that there was always a lever, that every room had a mechanism and the only difference between people was who found it first. She had found them in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in congressional ante-rooms and beltway dinner parties, and she had pulled them without hesitation, because hesitation was the thing her father had told her would be her undoing, and she had spent her whole life refusing to give him the satisfaction of being right. There was no lever here. She lowered the phone. Gabriel Ortiz was standing 3 feet to her left, hands clasped in front of him, looking at the floor. He had not moved since he'd asked her to apologize. He was not going to help her with what came next. She could tell that from the way he was standing, not hostile, not satisfied, just finished. Like a man who has discharged the only debt he felt he owed to this particular situation. The room was still watching her. The barista she had brushed off. The man at the counter. The woman with the reading glasses by the window. The couple near the door who had stopped pretending to look at anything other than what was actually happening. All of them, watching. And across the room, in the booth they had started the morning in, Daniel Whitfield was settling Lily back into her seat, his hand on the back of her head for just a moment, his lips moving in something too quiet for the room to hear. Rebecca had spent 20 years learning to read rooms. She knew what the room was saying right now. She had known, honestly, for the last several minutes. She just hadn't been ready to stop moving long enough to let herself hear it. If you're still with this story, chances are, you know someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's going through something hard, and needs to be reminded that how you carry yourself when the world is watching tells people everything. Share this video with them. Drop a comment and tell me what this story is bringing up for you. Every single comment helps this story reach someone who might need it today. The man in the corner had not put his phone away fast enough. His name was Trevor Alt. He was a 43-year-old high school history teacher from Weaverville, 12 miles up the road, who had stopped in for coffee on his way to pick up grading supplies at the office store on Tunnel Road. He had not intended to record anything. He had pulled out his phone when Rebecca's voice first rose above the ambient noise of the shop, not out of any particular plan, just the reflex of a person who senses that something is happening that the world might want to know about later. He had been recording since before the kick. He stood up now from the corner table, slowly, phone in hand, and looked at Rebecca Sinclair. "I got the whole thing," he said. His voice was steady but not unkind. "From when you came in. All of it." He paused. "She's not telling it right." The woman by the window, her name was Cora Hutchins, 71 years old, retired school principal, Asheville native, who had raised 3 children in this city and spent 35 years learning how to read the difference between a misunderstanding and a choice, put down her reading glasses and stood up. "Neither is she," Cora said, and there was no heat in it, just clarity. The same tone, Daniel thought, that she had probably used in 3 decades of telling students the truth about themselves. Then the young couple by the door, a man and a woman, late 20s, sharing a pastry when this all started, looked at each other briefly and stood up too. 4 people, standing, phones up or not, all saying the same thing without coordinating it, the way people say the same thing when they've all watched the same thing happen. Rebecca looked at the row of them. She was very still. A stillness that had nothing in common with Daniel's stillness. His was inhabited, voluntary, chosen. Hers was the stillness of someone who has just understood that the architecture they were standing in has been compromised, and is waiting to discover how much of it is still holding. The front door opened again. 2 officers from the Asheville Police Department stepped in. Someone had called quietly, discreetly, the way people call in situations like this when they want the right thing to happen without making it worse. The officers read the room in the professional, practiced way of people trained to read rooms, and then one of them approached the cluster of people near the center of the shop, and the other moved to where Daniel was sitting. "Sir," the second officer said, "you involved in this?" "I'm her father," Daniel said, nodding toward Lily. "You mind if I get your account of what happened?" "Not at all." He gave it the same way he gave everything, quietly, without embellishment, in the order things had actually occurred. He did not describe Rebecca's shoes. He did not describe the cost of the hot chocolate. He described a 6-year-old crouching to pick up a napkin, a collision, a series of words, a kick. He described it the way a man describes something that happened, not the way a man describes something that was done to him. Lily sat across from him eating the second hot chocolate, 2 stars on the side of the cup, because Kezia had made it herself and had decided that the circumstances warranted an upgrade, and listened to her father talk to the police officer with the focused attention of a child who is absorbing something important about how adults handle things. Across the room, Trevor Alt was showing his recording to the first officer, who watched it twice and then asked Trevor a series of quiet questions. Cora Hutchins was being interviewed separately near the window. The young couple near the door was talking to a third officer who had come in shortly after the first two. Every account, taken separately, described the same sequence of events. Rebecca Sinclair sat in a chair someone had placed behind her at some point. She hadn't noticed who or when with her general counsel, Douglas Park, on the phone in her left hand, her phone still in her right, and the expression of someone who is listening to two different impossible conversations simultaneously and losing ground in both. Douglas was telling her to say nothing. She had, for once in her professional life, taken the advice. Gabriel Ortiz stood near the door, not with Rebecca, not positioning himself as her protection, just present, available if needed, if asked, if anything he could offer would help. Which he doubted. He was watching Daniel from across the room with the specific expression of a man who owes a debt he doesn't know how to name in the current situation, in this light, after this much time. 6 years. He had not said Daniel Whitfield's name out loud in 6 years. Had not let himself think about the Djibouti extraction in more than the vaguest possible terms, a door, a weight, a set of hands that didn't let go when letting go would have been the reasonable choice. He had built his entire post-service identity around forward motion, around not looking at the things behind him. He had been very good at it. He was not being very good at it right now. What happened next took about 20 minutes, though it felt both longer and shorter than that, the way significant things do when they're over. The officers took statements. They reviewed Trevor Alt's footage twice more, this time with both officers watching together, speaking quietly to each other after. They spoke with Rebecca's general counsel by phone for approximately 8 minutes. They spoke with Harlan Weeks's office. Someone had made that call. Daniel wasn't sure who for another 4. And then the first officer, a woman named Patterson, with a silver clip in her hair and the body language of someone who has seen everything and is therefore surprised by very little, walked to the center of the room and asked Rebecca Sinclair to stand. Rebecca stood. She was cited for misdemeanor assault and released on the condition that she remain in Buncombe County pending further review. Her general counsel arrived in person 40 minutes later. He had been, it turned out, already in Asheville for the same subcontractor meeting Rebecca had been racing toward, and the two of them left together through the front door without speaking. Gabriel Ortiz held the door. He didn't follow them out. He stood in the doorway for a moment after they'd gone, looking back into the coffee shop. His eyes found Daniel. He crossed back in. He stopped at the edge of the booth. He looked at Lily first, who looked back at him with the frank, assessing gaze of a child who has decided she is going to form her own opinion of this person, and then at Daniel. "Hey," he said. Daniel looked up at him. He did not seem surprised. He did not seem much of anything, which was, Gabriel had remembered, entirely characteristic. "Hey," Daniel said. Gabriel pulled out the chair across from them and sat down without being invited, which was also, Daniel thought, entirely characteristic. "You look terrible," Gabriel said. "I live in Asheville," Daniel said. "I'm doing fine." Gabriel nodded slowly. He looked at the table. He picked up a sugar packet and put it back down. He was a man who knew how to move in a firefight and had never been entirely comfortable with what to do with his hands in a coffee shop. "I didn't know you were here," Gabriel said. "In Asheville. I know you didn't. I would have—" Gabriel stopped. Started over. "I don't know what I would have done. Probably something like today," Daniel said. "Except with a little more lead time." Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "How long?" 4 years. "She know?" He nodded toward Lily. He had figured out enough about the timeline to know that the question was about Daniel's wife, not the little girl. "She knows her mom is gone," Daniel said. "She knows she's the best kid I've ever met." That's most of it. Lily, who had been watching this exchange, with the comprehensive attention of a child who understands she is being talked around, looked at Gabriel Ortiz with steady gray eyes. "My mom's name was Emily," she said. "She was a nurse. She was really good at it." Gabriel Ortiz held the child's gaze for a moment. Something moved across his face that he didn't try to control. "She sounds like she was great," he said. "She was the best," Lily said. and returned to her hot chocolate with the finality of someone who has made a statement they consider complete. Gabriel looked at Daniel. Daniel was watching his daughter with the expression Gabriel remembered from the one time he had seen this man frightened. Not the performance of courage, not the suppression of fear, but something that had moved through those two things and come out the other side into something quieter and harder. It was the look of a man who knew exactly what he was protecting and had made his decision about it a long time ago. I should have reached out, Gabriel said. After. I kept thinking I would. And then, Gabe, Daniel's voice was easy. You don't owe me anything. That's not true. It is, Daniel said. We were doing our jobs. You'd have done the same. Gabriel Ortiz shook his head once, slowly, the way a man shakes his head when he disagrees with something and has decided not to fight about it right now. He pulled a business card from his jacket. He slid it across the table. If you need anything, he said. Anything at all, call it. Daniel looked at the card. He did not pick it up. He did not tell Gabriel to put it away either. Lily and I are doing all right, he said. I know, Gabriel said. I can see that. He stood. I'm going to go figure out if I still have a job. He said it without bitterness, the way a man says something that is true and has already made his peace with it. Take care of her. That's the whole plan, Daniel said. Gabriel left. The door opened and closed, and the morning traffic outside was briefly audible, and then the coffee shop went back to its particular Saturday quiet. The hiss of the espresso machine, a low song from the speakers, the sound of a 6-year-old repositioning a cup with 2 stars drawn on the side. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at the house on Beaumont Street. No return address. Handwritten. Daniel's name on the front in precise, practiced lettering that broke down slightly in the middle of the last letter. The kind of break that happens when the hand holding the pen is steadier than the person directing it. He opened it at the kitchen counter after Lily had gone to school. The letter was 2 pages on plain white paper. No letterhead, no legal language, no PR scaffolding. It started with, I am not writing this because anyone told me to. It went on. She named the barista first Kezia, by name, describing the exact exchange at the counter and what she recognized. In retrospect, it had cost the young woman to absorb without responding. She named Lily specifically not the child, not your daughter, but Lily, a name she had apparently learned from one of the police reports, and she named what she had done to her, not in the language of accident or misunderstanding, but in the language of someone who has sat alone long enough to look at a thing directly. I made a 6-year-old believe, even for a moment, that she had done something wrong by existing near me. She wrote that sentence twice. The second time, the pen had pressed harder into the paper. She did not ask for forgiveness in the letter. She asked, instead, for the chance to earn it, and she was careful, painstakingly careful, in a way that felt like it had taken several drafts to arrive at about the difference between those two things. Daniel read it once through without stopping. Then he folded it along its original creases and set it on the counter. He stood there for a while, looking out the window at the yard, the bird feeder he'd put up the previous spring that Lily had immediately claimed jurisdiction over, the battered green pickup in the driveway, the Blue Ridge doing its October fog routine in the distance. He didn't know what Rebecca Sinclair would do with whatever this was. He didn't know if the letter was the beginning of something real, or the first move in a longer strategy. He had met enough people to know that sometimes those things looked identical from the outside, and the only way to know the difference was time. What he knew right now, this morning, in this kitchen, was that Lily would be getting out of school at 4:15, and he was going to be in the pickup line when she did, that there were groceries to buy, that the bird feeder needed refilling, that a 6-year-old had asked him, last night at dinner, if he thought they could get a dog, not any dog, specifically a small brown one, which she had described in considerable architectural detail, and he had said they could think about it, which both of them understood to mean yes. He put the letter in the drawer, where he kept things he needed to deal with later, and went to start the day. 2 weeks after that, Rebecca Sinclair appeared in a conference room in a federal building in Charlotte and gave a statement that did not match the one her public relations team had drafted. Douglas Park, her general counsel, sat beside her and said nothing because she had told him she did not need him to say anything, and for the first time in 4 years of working together, he had believed her. She named the harm to the child. She named the barista by name and described what she had said to her and how she had said it. She named the assumptions she had walked into that coffee shop carrying about who mattered, about who had the right to occupy a space she was moving through, about what her own urgency entitled her to, and she named the moment she had lost herself to them. She did not call it a bad day. She called it a pattern, and she called it by its right name, and when she was finished, there was a long silence in the room that she sat inside without trying to fill. She did not ask for leniency. She asked, in the plainest language she had used in a professional setting in as long as she could remember, for accountability. Not the kind that happened to her, the kind she was choosing. She had resigned from Sinclair Aerologics 8 days earlier, submitted her resignation letter before the board's emergency session, before the vote she knew was coming, in the 45-minute window between making the decision and losing the nerve for it. She had walked out of the building she had built from a rented office, and 3 employees, and 20 years of refusal with a box of personal items, and no one waiting to walk out with her, and she had sat in her car in the parking garage for 11 minutes, the same amount of time. She noticed that she had declared herself to be working with in that coffee shop, and then she had driven home. She was building something different now, smaller, quieter. It didn't have a name yet. She wasn't sure it needed one. 4 months after the morning on Merriman Avenue, Lily Whitfield came home from Claxton Elementary School carrying a backpack she had not left the house with. It was purple, her specific, declared, non-negotiable favorite color, a fact she had communicated to every adult in her life within approximately the first 10 minutes of meeting them. Medium-sized, good zippers, the kind built to last several school years rather than just one. On the front pocket, embroidered in small, neat stitches, was a single star. The school office had received it that morning with a note attached. For Lily Whitfield, Miss Pemberton's class. No other information, no name, no return address on the envelope. Lily carried it home held in front of her with both hands, the way children carry things they consider significant, and set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a moment before looking at her father. "It has a star," she said. "I see that," Daniel said. "Like Kezia puts on my cup." "Yeah," he said. "Like that." Lily looked at the backpack. She looked at her father. She was 6 years old, and she understood, in the particular way that children understand things that adults have to work much harder to arrive at, that this object was connected to the morning at the coffee shop in a way that didn't require explanation. She didn't ask for one. She picked it up and took it to her room and came back down 3 minutes later to ask about the dog. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter for a while after she'd gone upstairs. He thought about the letter in the drawer. He thought about a woman sitting somewhere building something smaller and quieter without a name for it yet. He thought about a bodyguard who had once pulled his business card back off a table and then left it anyway, who had sent a text 2 weeks ago that said only checking in, and had seemed satisfied when Daniel wrote back fine. He thought about Emily, who had known him well enough to say, "Don't let her grow up watching you carry this alone." He thought he was getting better at that. He thought Lily was, without knowing it, the reason why. He thought about the morning itself, the coffee shop, the silence, the 2 words he'd said into the center of a room full of people waiting for him to do something louder. He had trained for years in places that demanded loudness. The extraction, the breach, the call sign over the radio when the situation went sideways. He had been very good at all of it. What nobody told you, coming out the other side, was that the harder discipline was the quiet one. The choice, in front of a room full of witnesses who would have forgiven him for the opposite, to hold still, to hold his daughter, to let the room see what strength looked like when it wasn't performing. Daniel Whitfield could have ended that confrontation in seconds. He had the training, the reflex, 11 years of proof that he was capable of it. He chose restraint instead, not because he was afraid, and not because he needed the other person to understand why, but because a 6-year-old girl in butterfly rain boots was watching him decide who he was, and she was going to carry that decision with her for the rest of her life. The quiet professional doesn't need an audience. He just needs to know, when the moment comes, what he's choosing and why. And that is the full story of Daniel Whitfield, a man who walked into a coffee shop as a tired dad in a flannel shirt and walked out as something a whole room full of strangers would spend the rest of the week trying to explain to the people who weren't there. If this story stirred something in you, if Daniel's restraint reminded you that the strongest move in a room is sometimes the one nobody makes, then this channel is exactly where you're supposed to be. Subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. because every story on this channel is built around one question: what does real strength actually look like? Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe it's someone going through something hard. Maybe it's someone who forgot what it means to hold the line. And when you're done, leave a comment and tell me, when was a time you chose silence over satisfaction? When did holding still take more out of you than swinging would have? Your story belongs in this community, and someone reading these comments tonight might need yours more than you know.